All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight, presented by FanDuel here at The Volume. Happy Tuesday, everyone. We are live on AMP. If you guys are watching on YouTube or on the podcast feeds, don't forget that AMP is the very first place that you guys can get our post-game analysis. We are going to hit on 6 games tonight, including 12 different teams, starting with the Golden State Warriors getting shellacked on the road in Madison Square Garden without Steph Curry. You guys know the drill. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the Volume's YouTube channel so you don't miss any more of our videos. Follow me on Twitter at _JasonLT so you guys don't miss any show announcements. And then last but not least, if for whatever reason you guys miss one of these videos and you can't get back over to YouTube to finish, you can find them wherever you get your podcasts under Hoops Tonight. So the Knicks, the New York Knicks, have won 8 games in a row. Now, I don't want to rain on the parade too much here, but it is against a weaker stretch of their schedule. They beat the Cavs without Jared Allen. They beat the Atlanta Hawks at home with most of their guys playing, so that's a solid win. Then they beat the Charlotte Hornets and the Sacramento Kings. They beat a terrible Bulls team twice, and then they had a solid road win in Indiana. And then tonight against Golden State without Steph. Now, to be clear, winning streaks are almost always against weaker stretches of your schedule. To be honest, with how talented the league is now, it's nearly impossible to rip off a win streak against really good teams. Just go to ESPN.com and go to standings, and if you click on expanded standings, they show the breakdown of, versus teams that are 500 or better versus teams that are below 500, and even the best teams in the league are only winning, like the Bucks and Celtics are only winning like 3 out of every 4 games against teams that are above 500. That's not against the top 10 teams in the league. That's not against the top 5 teams in the league. That's literally against anybody who wins more than they lose. You're going to usually drop 1 out of 4 of them, even if you're one of the best teams in the league. And most of the good teams are hovering around 500 there. So I want to be clear, it's typical for win streaks to happen against weaker stretches of their schedule. If you zoom in on it a little bit, you've got 3 Knicks averaging double figures over this span. Coming into tonight, Julius Randle was averaging 27, 11, and 4 over the 7-game streak on 59% true shooting. Got his pull-up jump shot going finally. He was shooting 40% on 6 attempts per game. That was something that he was struggling with a lot last year and at the beginning of this year. RJ Barrett, 22 points and 6 rebounds on 55% true shooting. He's hitting his catch-and-shoot threes, about 38% on 5 attempts per game during the streak. And Jalen Brunson, 20 points and 6 assists on 55% true shooting, 43% on 8 pull-up jumpers per game, which is great, 64% on pull-up threes, which is outstanding. And I really like Quentin Grimes. He's pitching in about 12 a game during the streak on 45% from 3. I love his aggressive spot-up shooting. Gets really good lift. When you get really good lift in shooting situations, it limits the muscle memory part at the top of the shot. It makes it easier for you to replicate your shot so that it's, easier to be more consistent as a shooter. So there's lots of good stuff going on offensively for the New York Knicks. But the truth of the matter is they're winning because they're just absolutely dominating teams physically. This is one of the most commonly forgotten things about the game of basketball. And I think highlights and just the way that the game is consumed by the younger generation. No disrespect, it's been like that forever, and that's just part of what makes the game marketable. But everything focuses on the scoring and on the ball handling and the nifty passes and all of the highlight type of plays around the game of basketball. But at its core, basketball is a contact sport. This is something I hammer home all the time with the high school kids that I coach. Like, yeah, all of this is cool, and I want you guys to get better at this stuff, and we're going to practice this stuff. But at the end of the day, we have to win in the trenches. We have to win in all of the physical confrontations to have any chance to win basketball games. A huge chunk of what decides basketball games is physicality. So coming into tonight, obviously the numbers haven't updated yet, but in the last 7 games, the Knicks are only giving up 99 points per 100 possessions. They're the only team in the league giving up under 100 points per 100 possessions in their last 7 games. So they're number 1 in defense. And this is crazy. They're grabbing 56.3% of available rebounds, which is first in the league by a. Tonight against Golden State, they out-rebounded them 47-29. 14 offensive rebounds to just 4 for Golden State. 50-38 in points in the paint. 36 points off of turnovers, just running it down their throat every time they force a turnover. 16-6 in second chance points. And it's funny because if you look at it up close, I kept checking the box score through the game because I was like, when they're in the half court, Golden State's actually playing pretty well. Jordan Poole's making shots. You got guys contributing. On the other end, they're doing an okay job in the half court on defense against the Knicks, getting stops. And you looked at the box score, and Golden State, through almost 3/4 of the game, was out shooting the Knicks. They were shooting about 53%. The Knicks were shooting about 51% through a good 2/3, almost 3/4 of the game. They were executing better when they were in those half-court settings. But after the game, the New York Knicks shot 13 more shots than the Golden State Warriors by securing offensive rebounds, by forcing turnovers in the physicality of the game. They give themselves more shots on goal. You guys hear me talk a lot about half-court offense, half-court defense when we're evaluating teams. And a huge reason for that is because that's the static basketball environment. And when you get into the deep stretches of the playoffs, the static half-court environment is a good way to evaluate teams because teams are usually a little more coached at that phase. There's a lot more scouting. You're in front of all the other team's sets. Usually you're going to take away the easy stuff and force teams to beat you in the half-court. That's why we look at that. But at the end of the day, who cares if I'm getting 1.17 points per possession and you're getting 1.14 points per possession if I get 13 more shots than you? Because if I get 13 more shots than you, that's more than 13 additional points that I'm pitching into the pile there just by beating you in all of the physicality areas of the game. And, we're going to do, I'm not going to stay too long on the Knicks tonight because we want to do a deep dive on them. So we're working on doing these deep dives with adding film. As some of you guys noticed last week, we did like a 25-minute breakdown on the Memphis Grizzlies, really diving into what they do on both ends of the floor with a lot of footage. We are going to do that with the New York Knicks. That is going to air on Thursday. So keep an eye on the feeds. We're going to do a deep dive into the Knicks on Thursday. But make no mistake, we're going to talk a lot about individual players. We're going to talk a lot about individual skill sets. But the New York Knicks are winning because they are bigger and stronger than you. They're playing harder than you. And Tom Thibodeau has them committed to all of the details of the game of basketball. The Golden State Warriors continue to struggle with physicality, specifically on the road. They are now, not counting tonight's stats, obviously, they're 29th in road defense, 25th in road rebounding. And they have the personnel to be better with Kevon Looney and Draymond Green. They have enough front court personnel to thrive in those environments. They have athletic wings like Jonathan Kuminga and Andrew Wiggins who can crack down and grab defensive rebounds. They have guards in Steph Curry and Klay Thompson that have a history of competing in those settings. They are capable of being better. A big way to tell is just look at how they play at home. They are 3rd in defense at home, 15th in rebounding at home, which is not great, but a hell of a lot better than they do on the road. Now, yes, Andrew Wiggins being out absolutely hurts there. But this has been an issue throughout the season, even when Andrew Wiggins has been available. At some point, the urgency on the road is going to have to kick in. And I think a big part of this is just how many young guys they rely on in their rotation. We talked about this a lot. I think it was about a week ago. But when you're a young basketball player, you're usually more emotional. You struggle to replicate success. You struggle to avoid failure because you just haven't learned the lesson enough times. And you don't really have good habits when you're a young player. It's no different than just being an adult. Like, I'm a lot better at taking care of my adult life now in my 30s than I was in my 20s. I was a lot more sloppy with my habits and details throughout my daily schedule, right? You just learn to be an adult. And that extends to the game of basketball with competing the same way every single night, not just feeding on the energy of the home crowd or getting discouraged when the road crowd gets energetic as your team is starting to struggle. I think that's a big part of it. Young players have always struggled with that home road dynamic. But we're going to find out. They got Brooklyn tomorrow night. We're going to find out if they can bring a better effort on the road against a team in Brooklyn that's a very good defensive team, but that is not very physically imposing. So they should be able to hang around a little bit better there. The one last thing I want to talk about with Golden State with Jordan Poole, this is becoming kind of a recurring theme. He had 26 points tonight on 18 shots. He had several highlight plays. There was a Euro step there in the early second half that was just ridiculous. And I just remember thinking, I'm not sure how many athletes in the NBA can make that kind of Euro step while moving at the sheer straight line speed that he was moving at on that play. But he only had 1 assist. And this is becoming a thing with Jordan Poole, particularly when Steph is out of the lineup. When Steph is there and the team is kind of functioning the way it normally does, Jordan Poole embraces a role, which is shot creator, tertiary shot creator, if you want to call it that, behind Steph and Clay, right? But when Steph is out, it almost like he gets in his own head to the point where he thinks, I have to shoot my way into replacing what Steph brings to the table. And more often than not, what ends up happening is you'll see games like that where you'll have 26 points, but the team doesn't really jive on the offensive end of the floor. And he was a minus 27 tonight. And so I'd like to see, and this is going to be a good little extended stretch here. Steph did a little interview on the sideline during the game where he basically said, I'm not doing anything right now, not even touching a basketball, probably won't touch a basketball till January 1st. So Steph's going to be out a little while here. We heard about that when that original report came out. Adrian Wojnarowski said a few weeks. Sham's like, probably more than a month. And Steph all but confirmed that tonight. So what that means is Jordan Poole is going to have a long stretch of basketball here. And I hope that he understands that the best chance he has of doing his part to help the team win is to more embrace shot creation rather than shot making. And shot creation is all of the above. Shot creation is about making reads. Sometimes that means you're shooting. Sometimes that means you're creating shots for your teammates. But no matter what, your best chance to win is if the whole team is vibing offensively. So I'd like to see him tweak his approach just a little bit. But dude, the talent is insane. And a lot of times we forget because Jordan Poole's been around a long time. Like Jordan Poole's been playing it, like he was playing in that play-in game against the Lakers, making big plays in his early 20s. Like he is still very young. And just because he's been around a while, we kind of separate him from Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody and James Wiseman. But he's a hell of a lot closer to those guys in terms of experience than he is to the older players. All right, so we are going to rip through 5 games from last night, which was just a jam-packed NBA slate. Tons of good basketball to get to. We're going to hit on 10 teams in total, starting with the Bucks and the Pelicans. So the Bucks beat the Pelicans on the road, 128-119. Chris Middleton and Brandon Ingram were both out for this game. It was supposed to be kind of like a Giannis versus Zion type of battle. That was the way it was billed. But Zion had an absolute nightmare of a time dealing with Milwaukee's defense. They just pressured him on the ball with Drew Holiday attacking his handle. And knowing that Drew Holiday he had the freedom to get beat off the dribble because he had Brook Lopez and Giannis helping on the back line. He finished just 7 for 16 in the painted area in that game. He did have 7 assists, but he also had 6 turnovers. And then, as far as the battle with Giannis goes, Giannis poured in 42 and 10 on only 17 shots. So not much of a battle there. But what was really interesting to me about this particular game was it was kind of like a great explanation of the importance of stretch bigs, which this is going to be a theme throughout the rest of this show tonight, because we're going to talk about it a little bit with another team that's playing really well lately, the Minnesota Timberwolves, who have been leaning on Naz Reid, a stretch big, which is really opening things for them on the offensive end of the floor. And what's the counter to having Brook Lopez hawk the paint all night to contain Zion? Well, Jonas Valanciunas is not typically a super aggressive three-point shooter, but he is a capable three-point shooter. And he made 6 threes in that first half, making Brook Lopez pay for hawking the paint. And he had 28 points in the first half. But flip that dynamic a little bit. How does Jonas Valanciunas like to play defense? Same type of thing. A super deep drop coverage, lingering around the paint, helping on every drive, just like Brook Lopez does. And Brook Lopez is arguably the best rim protector, three-point shooter big that we have in the league. In the third quarter, Brook Lopez had 13 points on 5 jump shots. He had a couple of big corner threes when Jonas was helping over on drives. He had a pick and pop 3 above the break. He had like an ISO face-up jump shot in the short corner on the right side against Zion Williamson. And that same dynamic flipped on New Orleans for them overhelping with their rim protecting center. The Bucks really dominated the second half. They led by as many as 18. The Pelicans did go on a late run and got it within 3 before Drew Holiday. They got it within 3. They come down the floor. Brook Lopez comes and sets the ball screen. CJ McCollum, who's had a nightmare defending in pick and roll the last week or two, goes under the screen, and Drew Holiday, who's a professional pull-up shooter, just rises up and knocks down what effectively amounts to the dagger. The Milwaukee Bucks are now in sole possession of the best record in basketball. And it's been kind of funny because it's been a really uneven stretch from them, because they won 4 straight after losing to the Lakers, and then they blew a game on the road in Houston with all of their stars playing. Then they absolutely dominated the Warriors, and then they got 50-pieced by the Memphis Grizzlies. They were down by 50 points in the fourth quarter. And then they, finished that streak off by handling the Utah Jazz and the New Orleans Pelicans. So it's been kind of uneven, but the bottom is completely falling out for the Boston Celtics. And next thing you know, now they are 22-8 and first place overall in the NBA. It's kind of unusual to see a 22-8 team as the best record in the league, but that just goes to show you how much parity there is in the NBA right now. The Pelicans have now lost 4 games in a row, and it's their defense that's mainly fallen apart. They have a 121 defensive rating in their last 4 games against some good offenses too in Utah, Phoenix, and Milwaukee. And this is something that, this is something that you're going to see kind of be a recurring theme for these heavy drop coverage teams that kind of have some limited defensive players playing, right? Because CJ McCollum, not a great defensive player. Trey Murphy will one day be a good defensive player. Right now, not a great defensive player. Zion Williamson shows some flashes, had a big corner 3 block the other night, looking like he was at Duke. He's making more plays than he used to make, but he still is getting hunted a lot in specific situations, particularly at the end of games. The Utah Jazz in their second matchup hunted him a lot in that overtime game. So they've got some limited offensive players. And so against bad teams that don't have great pull-up jump shooting and aren't great at executing in the half court, they can funnel Jonas Valanciunas and they can replicate a good defense. And they are 6th in defense overall this season, right? That seems good on the surface. But the truth of the matter is, according to Cleaning the Glass, when they are playing against top 10 teams by point differential, the Pelicans are allowing 116.2 points per 100 possessions, which ranks 20th in the league against that particular set of teams. As a result, they are 6-10 against teams that are 500 or better, and 12-2 against below 500 teams. So there's some fool's gold stuff going on with the Pelicans where they're kind of manhandling bad teams on the strength of their drop coverage and playing better defense against those teams, and they're really struggling against the best teams. Now, Brandon Ingram, when he's engaged, is a very good defensive wing that solves a lot of problems, right? When they get into the playoffs, I don't think they're going to play Jonas as much. I think they're going to go small a lot. It's going to be a lot more Larry Nance. So I'm not down on them overall, but I do think that, when they were at the top of the West, maybe that's not a realistic idea of where they are. They're probably a little bit more middle of the pack type of team in the Western Conference. All right, moving on to Mavericks Timberwolves. So the Timberwolves were missing Karl Towns and Rudy Gobert in this game and won 116-106. Minnesota was actually trailing 37-29 in the second quarter and finished the second quarter on a 28-7 run to take a 13-point lead and really never looked back at that point. It was a really interesting lineup that they won that particular game with. If you remember when they made the trade, I didn't fundamentally like the way that they had changed their identity because they were kind of like a 5-out basketball team. They would have Karl Towns at the center, and they would play, Patrick Beverley, who's a good perimeter defender. Jaden McDaniels would be out there a lot as a perimeter defender. They had a lot of good perimeter defensive players that they shipped out in the deal. And as a result, they were playing a lot of D'Angelo Russell and Karl Towns at the 4, having to guard perimeter players, and the whole fundamental identity of the team shifted. And now you've got Rudy Gobert clogging things up in the paint all the time. Well, the lineup that they ran to get this advantage against Dallas in the second quarter was Anthony Edwards, who was a very good on-ball defender. Obviously, he still has some ways to go in terms of team defense, but he's a very good on-ball defender. Jalen Nowell, who's young and a very good athlete, is capable of good on-ball defense. Austin Rivers, who literally gets an NBA paycheck because he's a good on-ball defender. Jaden McDaniels, who literally gets an NBA paycheck because he's a good defensive wing. And Naz Reid. And so as a result, they were able to play 5-out basketball on the offensive end of the floor. And on the perimeter, they were able to contain, which makes it so that their defense is more functional even without Rudy Gobert on the floor. And I thought they did a really nice job in that second quarter run of just pressing up on Dallas, because Dallas can be really slow. and they walk the ball up the floor, and then they run their action, and they, end up kicking out to some dude for three most of the time. But they usually only can get one action in, and you really limit their ability to attack a closeout when you pressure them, because now they're not getting into their offense until like 10, 12 seconds on the shot clock. Luka, gets his matchup, gets to work off the dribble, gets to his spot, draws that double team, makes that kick out pass, and there's only like 4 seconds on the shot clock. So if you catch it and they make one solid defensive rotation, all of a sudden a limited offensive player, someone like Dorian Finney-Smith, who can knock down and catch and shoot three, but isn't an outstanding closeout attacker, that dude now has to make a play. And man, Dallas's offense just completely fell to pieces in that second quarter run, just because Minnesota was doing a good job of pressuring them while they were trying to walk the ball up, which was slowing them down, getting them into their offense. And then on the offensive end of the floor, that true 5-out spacing with Naz Reid picking and popping to the three-point line as opposed to rolling to the basket opened up everything for people driving to the basket. So they had Kemba Walker on the floor. The Mavericks had Kemba Walker on the floor during this stretch. They straight up just attacked him with Austin Rivers twice. He had a driving layup and one along the baseline, and a driving floating and one out of pick and roll off of the left wing, because Kemba Walker's a limited defensive player, and it's really hard to offer help when you've got a big guy who's camping out of the three-point line that can beat you with catch-and-shoot threes. Jalen Noel and Anthony Edwards both had driving layups in the second quarter run. Naz Reid had a catch, pump fake, attack, closeout, get all the way to the rim for a layup. They got to the rim at will in that group against a good defensive team in Dallas because they had spacing. And this just goes to show you guys what we were talking about with that last game with that between the Bucks and the Pelicans, and then with this one, the importance of 5-out spacing. Because let me just give you guys some numbers to demonstrate this. When Naz Reid is on the floor as the only center for the Timberwolves, they have a 119 offensive rating, and they are +9 per 100 possessions in 563 possessions. With Karl Towns, another stretch big, as the only center on the floor, 124 offensive rating. Big shock, he's a better version of Naz Reid. +5 per 100 possessions in 554 possessions. Anything that ever involves Rudy Gobert, 108 offensive rating, -2 net in 1,685 possessions. So when you guys hear me talk about the difference between vertical spacing and 5-out spacing, because vertical spacing is a fancy word that you literally hear all the time, particularly with Rudy Gobert. Like a lot of Rudy Gobert supporters, you always will hear screen assists and vertical spacing, because those are two basketball concepts which are real, but they are minuscule in value relative to what any average player in the NBA can do, which is finish out of the dunker spot. There is value there. There is value in screening. There is value in being in the dunker spot. But that is a much more replaceable value on the offensive end compared to what 5-out spacing does. 5-out spacing is about making much longer defensive rotations. It's very simple. If I'm on the right wing and I beat my man off the dribble, and my big man is guarding somebody in the dunker spot, he's already there because he's arm's distance away from the guy in the dunker spot. He's already under the rim. It's an easy rotation to make. And typically there's already a shooter in the corner. That defender can then crack down on the big man in the dunker spot, right? It's an easy rotation to make. If I'm guarding the man in the corner and there is nobody in the dunker spot, I have to cover significantly more ground to get over there. And chances are, especially when you're dealing with guys that are working on the perimeter, you have to have quicker defensive players out there, which are usually smaller. So the lack of rim protection makes it so much easier for you to get to the rim. And the thing that's so frustrating about it is, how is it that the general manager, how is it that the front office for the Minnesota Timberwolves didn't look at the roster, see who your star is? Your star is Anthony Edwards, literally guard LeBron. That's what he reminds me of, because he is a downhill power guard getting to the rim. He needs space to get to the rim. The best version of this team was always going to be spacing. Just like LeBron needed Chris Bosh, just like LeBron needed Kevin Love, just like LeBron needed Anthony Davis. When you are a downhill power player, you are always going to be at your best when you have space to operate. And that concept, I think, has been overlooked way too frequently in the NBA these days, because teams are obsessed with navigating the NBA regular season with a good drop coverage. And I'm not undercutting the value of that. It is value, but it's a give and a take. You're giving rim protection at the expense of easy offense. When offense is clunky, it gets discouraging. When guys are struggling on the offensive end, they're less willing to work hard on defense because they're not feeling good and confident about themselves. Anthony Edwards, if he's feeling good about himself getting to the rim, he's going to be more willing to sit in a stance and contain a ball handler. If you contain a ball handler, you don't need a rim protector. The best form of rim protection in basketball is perimeter defense. And so I think that the Minnesota Timberwolves have been a great case study in how team building in an old style persuaded a team to waste a bunch of assets on a player that kind of caps the success of this particular team. They are 6-4 since the Karl Towns injury. They've won 3 straight. Anthony Edwards on the floor with Naz Reid and no Gobert or Karl Towns this season is plus 13 per 100 possessions in 440 possessions. Could not be more clear the direction this team needs to go. And the problem is they overpaid for what is a really bad contract in Rudy Gobert, and there's no chance in hell that they're ever going to recoup those assets. So they're probably going to end up camping on him as a matter of pride at this point, especially for a newly hired GM. Last thing I wanted to hit on in this game was just Dallas's offense. They are really prone to these cold spells because they become super predictable, bringing the ball up the floor slow. We just talked about this. If you bring the ball up slow and you don't get into your action until you get the right matchup, then you might not actually start beating someone off the dribble till 10 seconds are left, which means you're not making that kick out pass till there's only a handful of seconds left, which means you limit your ability to have multiple attacks or to give people the chance to drive and kick a little bit. So what I'd like to see is more of a change up from Luka. Now, it's more like a fastball to everything he throws is a change up. But at the end of the day, Luka needs to change the pace a little bit when they get super stagnant. I'd like to see him try to bring the ball up with pace, specifically as a mix-up when they're getting a little bit too stagnant on the offensive end. All right, Portland OKC. This was a really fun duel. The next 2 games, we're just going to talk about the very end of the games. Portland OKC, it was a fun duel between Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Damian Lillard and Anthony Simons. It was really close about middle of the fourth quarter. Anthony Simons hits back-to-back pull-up threes. He had a bunch of pull-up jumpers down the stretch of this game, a couple of them that were right in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's face. And then on the other end of the floor, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was just completely bullying Anthony Simons, getting to his spot, literally just hitting the same move over and over again. Spread, ISO, top of the key, couple hard dribbles to the left, get to 10 feet, pound dribble, step back, and just rise up from 10 to 12 feet for that little short jump shot. One of the things I love about SGA is he's got a super versatile scoring skill set. Almost no 2 shots look alike because he's got so many different spots on the floor that he can rise up and shoot. It's kind of like the opposite of what you've seen from James Harden over the years. But then down the stretch, Damian Lillard makes 2 massive reverse layups to tie the game. But with 3 seconds left, SGA, guarded by Justice Winslow, kind of cuts down to the block. And on the catch, just quick spins to the baseline, which forces Justice Winslow to take a couple hard defensive slides and does another pound dribble step back, gets plenty of separation, rises up, and swishes a little 15-footer on the baseline at the buzzer for his second buzzer-beating game winner of the season. Check this out. SGA leads the entire NBA with 79 points in clutch situations this year on just 51 shot attempts. That's insane. He's playing like an MVP this year. He's just on a terrible team. He's got when he's on the floor, they're about dead even with teams, which doesn't sound impressive, but when you look at the roster, it absolutely is. And they get outscored by 8 points per 100 possessions when he's off. That's an on-off split that replicates what most MVPs do. It's just a combination of outstanding pull-up jump shooting and downhill scoring at the rim. He is 6th in field goal percentage among pull-up shooters who are taking at least 8 per game at 45%, which is outstanding. And Ja Morant is the only guard in the league who scores more in the restricted area per game. All right, Orlando, Atlanta. So Orlando comes in on a 6-game winning streak. Atlanta actually led this game 124-112 with 3 minutes left. Trae Young hit a pull-up 3 because Mo Wagner was just a little bit slow getting up. Trae, of course, gets right in Mo Wagner's face, starts talking shit, because the Hawks just talk tons of shit for being a pretty average basketball team. And then the wheels just completely came off. DeJounte and Trae started turning the basketball over. Trae kept the Magic played Kevon Harris down the stretch of this game, and he did a really nice job defending Trae Young, just walling him up, cutting him off from the rim and forcing him to shoot over the top. He kept trying this like janky floating bank shot. I want to be clear, Trae had a great game, but he really struggled down the stretch of this game. But he kept trying this like janky floating bank shot that he kept missing. And then Markelle Fultz, we talked a lot about how his hustle plays on the glass helped the Magic beat the Celtics in that second road matchup the other day. Well, he did it as a scorer in this particular game, got downhill twice in the final minutes, including a reverse layup with 3 seconds left that put the Magic up by 1. And then out of a timeout, the Magic or the Hawks run like a screening action to get DeJounte Murray on the left baseline, and he shoots a pull-up jump shot, a tough, fading, drifting pull-up jump shot that he misses, but Paolo Banchero gets up into his landing area. Easy call. This wasn't one of those like, oh, he jumped way forward. Like he legitimately fouled him. And DeJounte Murray goes to the line, makes 2 free throws, and the game is over. And it's, you really have to be conscious fouling jump shooters at the end of games, because you'd much rather lose on a guy making a tough shot, like a tough drifting jump shot, than to watch him win the game standing by himself 15 feet away from the basket at the free throw line, right? But it's just a good lesson for a young player on a young team. And it sucks, but this is the year where they can afford to make mistakes because they don't have any real ambitions. But this could have been their 7th consecutive win had they not made that mistake. So it's a good lesson for Paolo Banchero to learn. So I want to talk about Markelle Fultz for just a second. We talked about his hustle plays, but I want to talk about his overall production. So on the season, he's averaging 12, 4, and 5 in 27 minutes per game with 1.7 blocks and steals combined in just 27 minutes. So if you extrapolate that out to per 36, which is a normal high volume player, that's 16, 5, and 7 with 2.2 stocks. That was his season high 24 against Atlanta. And if you look at his production, he has 117 points on 118 pick and rolls, counting passes, which is above average. That's 58th percentile. 26 points on 20 ISOs, which is excellent. That's in the 93rd percentile. And 87 points if you just look at him as a passer. So plays where he passed out of ISO or passed out of pick and roll, they've scored 87 points on 82 possessions, which is very good. He's also 23 for 52 on jumpers, which is 44%, which is great. 7 for 15 on threes, which is outstanding. 16 for 41 off the dribble, which is 39%, which is not good, but it's respectable. Good is right around 40. Great's right around 45. He is 0 for 4 on pull-up threes, though. Though the only real weak spot right now for him is at the rim. He's about 49% on the rim, but he's just 24 years old. He's been through such a weird journey since he came into the league, but he still is a very exciting young guard who just has not been able to stay healthy and available on the court. But there's a lot of really interesting stuff coming from him to start this season. The Hawks, even with their fortunate free throw win against Orlando, are just 5-8 in their last 13 games. They have the ninth worst record in the league over that span. They're 17th in offense and 22nd in defense, 27th in rebounding. Trae Young is shooting just 42% from the field and 25% from three with 4.5 turnovers per game. The reality is that just like we've always talked about with LeBron and AD, with Kawhi and Paul George, with any of the other star pairings around the league, you had better be a super duper star or be really good in the details of the game. And if you're going to be 27th in rebounding and 22nd in defense, you're going to have your stars produce better. And Trae Young and DeJounte Murray just simply have not been good enough. And I don't really like the energy around this team. They talk a lot of shit, like I said, for being a pretty average basketball team. And they don't really look like they're having a ton of fun on a night-to-night basis. Plus, there's all that stuff going on with Trae and the coach as well. It's just really disappointing season for the Atlanta Hawks overall. Raptors Sixers. So this is the Tobias Harris corner 3 game. So the Raptors looked like they were going to run away with this one in regulation. They were up by 7 with 4 minutes left. And Tobias Harris, we talk a lot about rescuing possessions with shot making, catches in the corner, late clock situation, guarded, and just rises up over a contest. Probably got fouled. It didn't get called, and knocks down a 3, which kind of changed the dynamic to the game. Then Embiid draws a double team, swing. DeAnthony Melton, same corner, knocked down 3. Now it's a 1-point game. Embiid draws another foul, goes to make 2 free throws. Now they're up 1. Then James Harden gets a driving layup in transition. Now they're up by 3. They flip the script on the Raptors pretty quick down the stretch. But then Pascal Siakam, transition drive, draws a foul, makes a free throw. Then he makes like a really high difficulty scoop shot to send the game to OT. Pascal Siakam was great last night, 38, 15, and 6. But in overtime, it was locked at 101 forever before Tobias Harris once again on a corner kick out hits a three to break the tie. He actually hit another three on a pass from DeAnthony Melton that put the lead up to 6, but it got wiped away by an illegal screen by PJ Tucker on review. And then in the final minute, Pascal Siakam missed 2 pull-up threes, and the Raptors lose. They've now lost 9 of their last 11 games. Fred VanVleet is going to have nightmares about that game. He missed several wide open threes down the stretch and finished just 3 for 15 from the field. But you guys can probably guess where I'm going here. The story of this game, once again, was Toronto in transition. Through the first these numbers are absolutely wild. Through the first 38 minutes of the game, Toronto had 21 transition possessions, leading to 27 points. They averaged 24 transition points a game, like we talked about in the Golden State game when Golden State held them to 12. Over the last 10 minutes of regulation in OT, they managed just one single transition possession, that Siakam drive where he drew the free throw right before his scoop shot, which Embiid blocked, and they called a foul on PJ Tucker, and he made one free throw. So all but one of their possessions down the stretch over the last 15 minutes of action was in the half court. And they are one of the very worst half court offenses in the league. Philly is the second best half court defense in the league, and they managed just 21 total points in the final 15 minutes of that game. That's the story of the season for the Raptors. A complete lack of offensive skill that makes it so that they cannot win unless the game is fast and loose up and down the court. As soon as you strangle the pace on them and trap them in the half court, you can beat this team. And that's precisely why I was pitching that OG Anunoby for Darius Garland trade as something that would just influx some offensive talent into this team. Zach Lowe had a report that OG Anunoby has sky-high trade value and that a lot of teams are interested. I mentioned OG Anunoby as a potential trade target if the Lakers wanted to go win now with Anthony Davis. But the bottom line is they got to do something because fundamentally this team is not capable of scoring in the half court, and you have to be able to score in the half court to win in the NBA playoffs. It's just the reality. Unless you are a all-world defensive team the way the 2021 Bucks or the 2020 Lakers were, and the Toronto Raptors are not an all-world defensive team. That's just a fact. And then for Philly, that's always going to be their best indicator of success. Can they control the pace? And when they sprint back in transition and they keep teams in the half court, they get stops. They have the second best half court defense in the league. They are up to 11th in transition defense after their nightmare start. You guys probably remember us talking a lot about that at the beginning of the season. After the Lakers game, I told you guys that I thought the Sixers were primed to go on a run to start the year. Why? Because they fixed their transition defense and they were starting to get healthy finally. And they've won 5 in a row now. I was saying that would probably start next year when Tyrese Maxey came back. They're already starting without him. So it's an exciting team, and it all begins with them playing lights out on the defensive end of the floor. I also said before the year that if you guys remember in our power rankings, I had my top 4, Golden State, Boston, Milwaukee, and the Clippers. I think I had Milwaukee in second, Boston in third. But if you remember 5 and 6, I had Philly and Brooklyn. Because of how much talent they had, I just had them as if things go right contenders because they had so many question marks. James Harden's health, Joel Embiid's health, Doc Rivers, everything going on in Brooklyn. We talked about those things. Well, they got off to rough starts, but both of those teams are hot now, and they are now 4th and 5th in the Eastern Conference. All right, guys, that is all I have for tonight. Remember, our plan for the rest of the week, we are taking tomorrow off, but keep an eye on the feeds for Thursday. We are going to have a full breakdown of the New York Knicks and their recent success. Then we're going to take a couple days off for the holidays. We'll take Friday, Saturday off. And then Sunday, for Christmas Day, we plan on doing 3 different instant reaction videos. So keep an eye on the feeds, and I will see you guys on Thursday and then again on Sunday.